Perfect. So, good morning again, everyone. I am Luca Belli. I'm a professor here in FGV, the law school, and I am one of the persons that's for 3 years. I think it's more than 3 years, almost 4 years that we are building CPDP Latam. And I wanted to introduce our speakers today in the first opening table. This opening plenary of CPDP Latam 2023. The global topic of this year is cooperation, innovation, and data protection in Latin America. And in this first opening plenary, we have a few ideas that will be developed in the next 2 days. So I will start by introducing Daniel Vasquez, who is head of growth of NIM, that is one of our sponsors, Ana Brian, who is the rapporteur of UN about privacy, Nina Daora, that is our researcher of artificial intelligence and member of the TikTok boards and member of many boards, my colleague Nicolas Zingales, professor of FGV and works on the e-commerce group, and director president Magno Alves, that is the director of the National Agency of Data Protection, and Evelyn Miller, who is the vice president of Meta for Data and Privacy Policy. And we are going to have Yasodara Cordova, who is the principal privacy researcher of Unico, but she had a delay in her flight, and she's going to arrive while we speak. So, in order to start the third edition of our event, I want to ask for 1 minute of silence to honor Danilo Doneda, who is the only person who is missing here, and he was one of the pillars of the creation of CPDP Latam. So I'm going to ask for you for 1 minute of silence, thinking about him, respecting and honoring the memory of Danilo Doneda. One way to think that it's important to think about the memory of Danilo was the creation. We had the research award since the creation of the CPDP in order to honor the best publications of the year that we received in our call to papers. And we also created the Danilo Doneda Award. That is award of the best publications that are submitted to our call to papers. And I want to thank the members of the evaluation commission of this award, of Danilo Doneda Awards. That is not a competitor of Danilo Doneda of ANPD. That is very important and honors the best research nationally. Our objective is to honor at the regional level, because Danilo was not only a pillar of data protection and the digital policies in Brazil, he was extremely important in the region. So it's good to give these two dimensions to the legacy of Danilo, and I really want to thank Professor Caitlin Mulholland, Kiadi Tefer, and Gloria Gonzalez, and Irene Camara, and Professor Jacqueline Abreu, and Marcelo Crespo, and Rafael Guilhard, who evaluated all the papers and they selected the best ones. The best article was from Nicola Edith Erika Bacconi, and then the two other the runner-ups was the article of Pablo about artificial intelligence and legitimate interest. It is very important this year with ChatGPT and other technologies, and Katarina, Gabriela, and Sebastian. Oh, she's here. And another paper that is extremely important because it's not only because of this award, but it won the Stefano Rotardo Award. So it's a high-level research. Having said that, I wanted to spend a couple minutes. Let me introduce Yasodara Cordova, who managed to arrive in the beginning of the session, although she had problems in her flight. And I wanted to start saying that one of the legacies of Danilo clearly is the idea to build together the culture of data protection. This type of event and the type of cooperation, the type of innovation with our collaborative ideas that take place in this type of event is essential to build the data protection culture. The culture in which innovation and data protection get stronger mutually, and the data protection culture, as Stefano Rodotas used to say, is essential for the integration of the population of society and the value of data protection. We have to consider data protection as the guiding principle of the development, and we dedicated the first session to innovation to strengthen data protection, because the innovation and data protection, they should be considered as two principles that strengthen each other. Innovation is essential to generate new technologies that strengthen the privacy and data protection, and data protection and the privacy that every year they are known as autonomous individual rights, as it happened in Brazil last year. So they are guiding principles of the technological development. It's a symbiotic relationship. So in order to build this symbiotic relationship, to know that this symbiosis will happen, it is fundamental that each one of us do their work. I studied in France in my doctors. At the first time that I wrote the first particle of the law of data protection in France, that in 1938 said that the information technology should be at the service of every citizen, and this is very good. I think this should be the meaning of this conference and this panel, of our collective action, our collective responsibility to build data protection. The researchers, while being innovative in their research and in their solutions, and then the developers of the private sector embedding data protection in the technology and making data protection an additional quality, an additional value, and a strategy to gain competition in the market. And so data protection should be a valuable asset to gain competition, should be a strategy and a differentiation to increase quality. There are many activists now that you have to request from the decision makers and the private sector and the researchers, and you should be innovative in the proposals, and also the regulators, not only overseeing but also educating. The value of education is underexplored, especially in Latin America. ANPG is doing an excellent work with the public hearings. It's very important for the regulator to educate the public, and we have to talk to the regulators. And many colleagues here, you know that this year I petitioned ANPG to evaluate if the training of data of the algorithms of the open AI is according to CDPD or LGPD or not. In my personal opinion, when I asked ChatGPT, tell me everything you know about Lucabelli, and he showed a lot of personal information along with some information that seems mine but they are not mine, and it's likely that my personal data is being used to train the model, and it's highly likely And the company should have the obligation to communicate, to tell me how these data were obtained, how they are going to be used, for how long, and to explain, according to the Article 20 of the GDPR, the criteria that were adopted to make decisions. Because this affects my interests, so I have the right to know how this decision was made. So this is my personal opinion. Of course, I'm going to hear all the other authorities from ANPD and the other authorities in Latin America. And I think that we should be more innovative. Considering that technology is global, we need more innovation in how we inspect and how we create education about technology. Along with Anna and Jonathan and Nelson and Pablo Palazzi, we are doing a work in how we can have a Latin American system of data protection. We have to think on how we approach data protection. So the pedagogy is much more interesting as an approach than the sanction. If we bet in the legal security in the sanction of the regulators, we are in the pathology of the thing. The disaster already happened. We need to remediate. We need to work on the education to avoid the disasters. So we need to understand the regulation in a more innovative way and not sanction after the disasters, but education to avoid the disaster from happening. So this is one of the legacies of Danilo. Education, investing in research, dialogues, in order to avoid the provisions of the abuse of data protection and personal data. I'm sorry for being too long. This is one of my flaws. And I will pass the floor to Nicola for a small introduction, and then we will start with our speakers here. Thank you, Luca. Good morning, everyone. It's a huge pleasure to be here and being able to say a few words about the topic today and to honor our master Danilo. Today we are talking about innovation. What is innovation? Who doesn't like innovation? Actually, that depends on how we define the concept of innovation. It's not only something new. For example, we have the intellectual property systems that creates a few necessary elements to call a new concept as innovation.
For example, they put down requisites for resolving a technical problem in a non-obvious way for patents, or a way of expressing a concept originally, copyright, or the distinctive character of a brand, for example. So clearly, it's not any type of innovation that is favored in this context. Now, if we think about data protection or the system of data governance, do we want to favor any kind of innovation? No. We need to identify some requisites here. I think that, first of all, we need to know what are the values that are sought out by the system, and we need to offer some kind of benefit to those who adopt in practice something that is different from the standard. People who do something that's new and that bring a benefit in the sense that they offer something that the system wants to encourage. So in this system, I think there's two ways of incentivating innovation in data protection. We also need to remember when we speak of this that data protection wants to protect people, but also favor the circulation and the use of this data. This is a point that our friend Danilo defended very much in his work. I believe that the first system then has to do with creating some kind of incentive to acknowledge those people who have and offer benefits to society through new practices. So, for example, codes of conduct that determine how we can reach certain objectives that are verified by authorities and adopted as practices in the sector, or specific recognitions, and also simply acknowledging cooperation with authorities. This has to do with different laws. For example, if we decide on a sanction or the level of that sanction, we need to consider the cooperative practices of these companies. Also, we need to consider the involvement of society. When companies, before they design their own products and services, they ask civil society and they consider their concerns that have to do with the products they're creating, then we have a kind of incentive for this to be acknowledged later on as an advantage, or at least as transparency that has to do with good practices. So this is related to my second point here. We're not just speaking of incentives or prizes that are offered by authorities, but the whole community having this capacity of pointing out the good practices. So transparency supports this exchange of good practices and comparisons, and this can be done not only by authorities but by researchers like us, and it needs to be supported. Besides these two ways of supporting innovation, we can think of many practices that are encouraged today. For example, the use of synthetic data, or the abandonment of cookies. Some companies now are trying new systems that do not allow the monitoring of third parties. And in the regulatory context, we have good practices like the regulatory sandbox, public consultation, which is used by the ANPD here in Brazil. We have, in the Brazilian context, the National Council of Data Protection that has to do with defining public policies related to this. So all of this has to do with forums like this one and these exchanges, which can lead to a dissemination of these models. Besides this, the government can incentivize innovation by investing directly in this. So in India, they have a system of data empowerment architecture, which acknowledges consent and verification of consent. This is financed by the government. And this is similar to what the government did here in relation to open banking and the PIX system. So a system that supports these beneficial uses of data. Besides this, today there is a bill in Congress that is looking at fiscal incentives to those companies that can demonstrate that they have spent for being compliant with the LGPD. This has not been approved yet, but I think this is heading in the right direction. We need to help society to create these innovations. For example, even through capacity building, new techniques like games, or other more active forms of engagement of the teams that work with privacy in companies, so that we can really have a different effect, having compliance instead of just having compliance that has to do with filling out documents. So all of this leads us to this promise of great innovations, but at the same time we need to consider what I said in the beginning. We're not looking at any kind of innovation. We need to remember the values that the system wants to promote. So in this sense, it's important for the regulatory agencies to define these values in a clear way, not in the way that was done, for example, in the beginning of AI, when there were many principles, but nobody knew exactly what was going on or what would happen if, for example, a form of AI were to provoke some kind of harm. So we need to have a clear vision about these values, how they are applied, and the authorities need to have an educational role in this, of showing how the law is applied, how cooperation with companies and dialogues with companies happen. And I think the ANPD is showing this path now with these processes that have been published and the possibility of following these steps throughout the process. Finally, my last observation, this is not just about transparency. We also need to remember the effects generated to third parties. So innovation like ChatGPT can create many benefits, positive points for the users, but also can have negative consequences to those people that are somehow mentioned, let's say, in a wrong way through these results. So there is this whole effect in the network. Many people are involved when we speak about data. It's not just our own data, it's the data of this whole network. So we need to consider these negative externalities. And in a way, we need to try and guarantee that these inequalities in society, these profound differences that have to do with power or the ability or of knowing what is happening or access, this needs to be considered when we promote innovation, because otherwise we are only promoting innovation thinking of a specific part of society and not thinking of everyone and how everyone could benefit from this. So I think we need to think in these terms when we reflect on innovation, and we will hear from our speakers today who will talk about different facets of innovations in society. And it's interesting for us to think about how these different kinds of innovations fit into society and how it is possible for us to guarantee that individuals and society really benefit from this. So I think now we can continue to our speakers. Luca will introduce our first speaker. Thank you so much, Nico, for reminding us of this sustainability in innovation and how it is important. Now, to get started with our session today with our speakers, I want to pass the floor to Anna Bryan, UN Special Reporter for Privacy. And you don't need to be here in the middle of the stage when you speak, okay? You can stay in your seats or however you wish. So, Anna, the floor is yours. You can go over there or sit here, whatever you want. Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be sharing these minutes with you all. I will invite you to reflect on AI and human rights, especially what has to do with data protection and privacy. Artificial intelligence, as you all know, is a manifestation of the technological evolution that we are living. It is a consequence of the fast evolution of information technologies and communications that are available and that make a lot of digital information available that is controlled and generated through algorithms and big companies and governments. Artificial intelligence can enhance our abilities and allow us to live our lives in a fuller manner, help us to solve problems. And if we look at the implementation of the Internet of Things, this can help the elderly, for example, in their domestic tasks and help people in their day-to-day. This also has to do, for example, with the weather forecasts that we are so used to using. They are possible thanks to AI systems. These examples arise in our day to day and also are connected to the economy, education, health, science, and other areas. So it's important to have the access to information be democratic so that it can benefit humanity. But also, artificial intelligence can create difficulties, and sometimes they can be serious. It can affect human rights, the right to privacy, and with so much information and personal data, a lot is at stake when we think about an AI system in decision making. For example, to know what time an alarm will go off so someone can take their medication, something that would be simple, it has to use a lot of personal information that has to do with that person's health problems, that person's location. All of this personal data can be used if it is not properly protected. This can lead to discriminating that person or can be used to harm that person or even cause their death. AI systems can create discrimination and affect the right to equity when they are used, for example, to analyze people's issues when they want to ask for Social Security benefits. In these cases, we need to look at information systems based on algorithms and previous experiences of evaluating people's conditions and their health conditions. We need to look at these systems and perhaps a complementary human intervention to evaluate people. Otherwise, their human rights will probably be violated.
The artificial intelligence systems are implemented having as a fundamental base the previous knowledge of the people. If these people have closed data, the system draw the conclusion that they will have a bias and that they can disseminate. They can disseminate misogyny data, racist data with bias that can cause discrimination of elderly and ethnic minorities and people with disabilities. Now, depending on the way that the algorithms are designed, it is complex and it brings risks. We should recognize that artificial intelligence can highlight our abilities and maximize them and maximize our time in making our vital interests in a full way. I'm not mentioning the damage that can be caused by artificial intelligence, for example, applying censorship systems, generating application of massive surveillance drones on weapons, on implementation of facial recognition systems that does not meet the freedom of speech. The artificial intelligence systems applied by the state and to justice and to the prosecution of the ideal of justice and the migration system, financial systems are a high potential risks. Therefore, we need to find a fair balance so innovation in terms of artificial intelligence should not be left aside, comparing to the fundamental rights involved. The person, the human being, is the end of every economic activity. So every social organization or political organization should highlight the dignity and the autonomy of the people, their equalities, their freedom, as well as helping and being supportive in their policies. So the human right to privacy, of protection, don't need to be only enshrined legally, but they have to be protected and effective. In the case of the application of artificial intelligence systems, it's not enough that we can have virtual regulation. We should have legal instruments that make effective these rights in an administrative and judicial way. And regarding artificial intelligence, the rule of law assumes the existence of rights and also the possibility that these rights can be effective. In the case of privacy and personal data protection, it's important to highlight that they are also manifested as a facilitator of other rights. For example, the rights of freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom to express your opinion, and the freedom to work with dignity. When we talk about facing the problems that artificial intelligence will bring with it, we are alluding to trying to identify the risks and analyzing the way to mitigate them. This tool that analyzes the risk impact is essential to reach this so-called balance in a way that we can enjoy the benefits of artificial intelligence and at the same time mitigating its risks. So we should work to act collectively with the states, generating policies and ethical patterns and ethical standards focused on the human being, that protecting human beings from their freedoms and their data protection, and that maximize the use of technology for the people, mitigating their risks and giving the planet basic conditions of sustainability. The application of the principle of transparency in the artificial intelligence systems is also in an ascending role to detect if the human rights were met, and there should have been explained previously how the algorithm works. The accountability also comes to complement these principles. In this regard, the Secretary General of the United Nations proposed a worldwide pact to measure the impact of artificial intelligence. This was very recent, a few weeks ago, in which authorities and industries could intervene, should make sure that the artificial intelligence systems are safe and aligned with ethical standards. I invite all of you to reflect on how we can innovate in terms of international cooperation in this matter, and how we can provoke an important impact in the international interaction systems, and as a consequence we can act with social and political interest groups and academic interests as well, and also that we can get together to take on the challenges that are involved in this issue. Thank you, Anna, for reminding us about the importance of the Sustainable Development Goals of United Nations and how this is aligned with the concept of innovation, reinforcing some of the points of my introduction. Now I'll pass to another type of facets of innovation of society. I'll pass the floor to the president of ANPD, Dr. Valdemar. So, Doctor, you have the floor for 10 minutes. Good morning, everyone. I would like to greet the other members of our opening plenary: Ana Bryan, Evelyn Miller, Daniel Vasquez, Yasodara Cordova, Nina da Hora, and our moderators Luca Belli and Nicolas Zingales. And I want to greet everyone who is watching us here in person or online. As it was said here, you talked about Danilo Doneda. I think it was a wonderful honor, and his contribution was very important to the country, especially in the area of data protection. It is an international character, and this week at the ANPG, we built a contest of monographies to honor Danilo Doneda, and I think that the peak of our contest was the speech of Laura Doneda, his 17-year-old daughter, who is preparing to study law. But her emotion while talking about her father and the love that she had for her father and the love that her father had for this topic, it was the peak of our ceremony. And if you have the opportunity and the curiosity, we are going to make this available in our website. It was a huge contribution that we had representing Danilo for data protection area. I also would like to thank FGV for the invitation to discuss the data protection topics. ANPG recognized the necessity and the importance of debates like these ones with multiple sectors. Remember that the Civil Internet Framework and the GDPR had many discussions before the enactment, and it resulted in an approval of a law that where everybody was heard: the academic sector, experts, entrepreneurs, political sector. So this is something that contributes to a better configuration of laws and standards and so on. We were invited here for the topic, what is the role of ANPG in order to shape the evolution of artificial intelligence in Brazil? We want that the National Authority of Data Protection can be the key stakeholder and the natural stakeholders in this process. And I'm going to explain why. Not so long ago, we had a webinar in the ANPG dealing with artificial intelligence and the Bill of Law of 2023 that is in our Congress that deals the regulation of artificial intelligence. We showed the points that the ANPG saw in this project, in this Bill of Law, and in the end, we released a preliminary study that we carried out comparing the Bill of Law and the GDPR. We saw that we have three factors. The first one, many interaction points between the use of personal data and artificial intelligence. As a consequence, in the regulation of AI and GDPR. The second point was the national and international experiences that demonstrates the necessity to act with the authorities about this topic. And the third topic was due to our role to care for the data protection and the privacy, the ANPG is the key authority in the regulation of artificial intelligence. In the first point, the proposal to regulate adopts a similar model compared to the European based in risk. So it approaches classifications of excessive risk, high risk. It limits the regulation and the unfoldings of risk in technologies and considers many levels of risk. They justify many different levels of restrictions, guarantees, and proportional safeguards. A frequent characteristic in these systems that is considered high risk is the personal data treatment and sensitive data. We highlight that the criteria established by the Bill of Law is that the relevant authority can update the list of artificial intelligence systems with excessive and high risk. That involves the use of of personal data. In this regulatory approach, many levels of risk demands different measures of governance and safeguards. And many of them present a synergy with obligations already included in the GDPR principles as transparency, safety, non-discrimination, the rights of the data holders, especially related to the decisions based on treatment, the automated treatments of personal data, the impact evaluation of algorithms similar to the impact reports, and the protection of personal data of the GDPR. Out of these points, I highlight the rights of those affected by the artificial intelligence systems. They are very similar to the rights and data holder already included in the GDPR. For example, rights to information, rights to explanation, rights to contest, rights to request reviews, and they are similar in the General Data Protection Regulation in the rights of access, of explanation, and request review. Ladies and gentlemen, these similarities open new spaces for convergence and also for potential conflicts. If our worldwide scenario, the trend is that the data protection authorities to be more and more involved with artificial intelligence systems and topics. For example, we have recent cases of investigations based on artificial intelligence as ChatGPT by authorities from Italy, from Spain, from Canada. Our Ibero-American network of data protection that Brazil is part of started in May on coordinated action to guarantee the protection of the rights to freedom of the individuals affected by the ChatGPT, besides other authorities from Singapore, UK, to work in regulatory sandbox, and our Dutch authority created a unit dedicated to deal with transparency and algorithm discrimination, as well as articulating work streams with other regulated sectors.
Our Brazilian authorities are also in these initiatives. In our 2023-2024 regulatory agenda, we are developing a pilot project for via a regulatory sandbox for AI, and we are very advanced in this work. It will go into a public consultation very soon. We have participated in various events addressing AI, and our team has been trained, and in the Senate last year, for example, our director Miriam participated in the team that issued a decision of more than 1,000 pages. So the ANPD, as key authority regarding AI, issued a joint paper with the European Committee of Data Protection in which they clarify that designating an authority for data protection as a supervising authority for AI is a strategy that guarantees not only the harmony in the regulations, but also a coherent interpretation of these devices via the regulated subjects. So this, of course, covers many activities and non-personal data involved in AI. But we must say that the ANPD, due to its abilities, is the key figure of regulating AI in Brazil. Considering the relevance of personal data use it represents for the functioning of various AI systems and its importance, we can observe that there are many competences that need to be aligned. The GDPR itself establishes that sanctions that refer to the protection of personal data has to do exclusively with the ANPD and its authorities, and these will prevail in what has to do with the protection of personal data and other related authorities. So I will finish here, and I want to make it clear that even with the small staff behind the ANPD, we are seeking to participate in all events that address AI. We continue with the capacity building of our team. We are always paying attention to the protection of personal data and the technologies used. So we are here ready and available to prepare and to work in these debates about data protection. Thank you very much. Thank you, President Valdemar. That was an excellent talk. There are 2 points that I want to highlight here. First of all, the essential role that the authorities of data protection are already having and will have in the next few years to guide and form the tech evolution for innovation, because innovation is more and more based on data and personal data. So the authorities of data protection, among all the different regulatory authorities, they have a specific role that has to do with innovation over the next decade. You have an essential role there. And I also want to congratulate the ANPD, because even though it is the youngest authority in this sector, and as Professor Valdemar has said, it was created in a very limited manner with a limited number of people, they are becoming a model and they are becoming a reference in terms of their participation and the dialogue that they promote with society. So this has to do with an institutional innovation that is very positive for the region as well. Now, to continue with our panel, I want to pass the floor to Evelyn Miller. Evelyn, it's your turn.
We don't need to wait for the translation. Please, Evelyn, the floor is yours. If you want to stay there or if you want to go there, as you please.
Thank you, Luca. You'll look at me to get over there. Thank you, President Director, for your comments. I think they were well thought out, and certainly agree that the ANPD is a good partner and collaborator in this process and will be for us as well. Our panelists already raised this earlier, and that's actually our moderators, Nicola and Luca, that innovation is changing every day, right? Technology is evolving. And with that, we believe the concept of privacy is also changing. You know, the way that privacy was thought of 10 years ago versus today is entirely different. We're talking about, Anna has raised the comment of AI being a part of the privacy conversation, and we couldn't agree more. Meta has, I think, harnessed the concept of privacy in a meaningful way. We've taken huge steps to bring privacy into every one of our products. Part of our roadmap always includes a privacy evaluation and review. As a part of that, we've created this privacy program, and that means that there's dedicated folks who just look at issues around privacy and how data is used in our products. in that, there's a sort of a core process called the privacy review. And that really goes to the analysis of how a product will go to market and what implications it will have for privacy. So that's part of what we do every day for our products, reviewing over 1,200 products and features in 1 month. So, oh, I'm sorry. Can you guys hear me? A little. Sorry. That's the danger of sitting, right? Is that you need to make sure to keep the microphone at your mouth. As a part of that, we've expended over $5 billion to maintain this privacy program. And beyond that, we've really tried to make privacy part of our DNA. By doing that, we've created principles that we look to as we consider products that we want to develop. Those principles are putting people first, providing controls that matter to people who use the products, considering everyone who would use our products, and never surprising people. And that's a very important piece. Putting people first means that as we think about products, we want to think about what is the expectation of a user, right? Making sure that what we use and how we use data is understood by the user. Providing controls, allowing users to control how their data is used. If you go to our privacy center, you'll see that we provide consumers control over how their data is used. They can actually decide whether or not they want certain data used for certain uses. We try to consider all kinds of different people. We talk about fairness and bias. That's part of our roadmap as well, considering who's going to use this product. Where are they coming from? What's the region of the world? We take that into account. We also think, well, let's not surprise people, right? Let's not put products out that they're not expecting. We have, I think, tried, especially in local policy teams, to connect with regulators in advance of launching products so that we can make clear what our intentions are and what the products are, and then making sure that our consumers are given notice in whatever way possible, whether it's a nudge or an email or another notice to the user. Beyond addressing privacy through our privacy program, we're also making huge investments in privacy-enhancing technologies. That's things like differential privacy, and we talk about things like, well, we call them pets, right? But in the actual application, those pets can be used for things like our Data for Good program. During COVID-19, we used differential privacy to actually develop visual maps of how populations move, right, in a local context. So we could understand how COVID-19 might be spread. We shared this information with NGOs, with governments who could use this information to better track the spread of COVID-19. We also use pets in race data measurement. And this is gathering information on how different ethnicities or race might experience a product, but also protecting the privacy individual through that process. We don't know who they are, we don't know where they come from, and that's how we're able to use pets to be able to measure the impact on different populations of people. We're also experimenting using pets, or what we call SMPC, to understand how ads are experienced by our users. And that information we can use and share with our advertisers so long as, again, the information remains anonymous and individuals are not, their information is not shared. The idea is to not allow for companies or advertisers to be able to re-engineer and figure out who the individuals are, creating technology that allows us to actually create anonymity. Now, these are all examples of technology and how we can use technology to protect privacy interests. But we are talking also about regulation. And we need to think about innovation in regulation, right? Traditional policymaking in the context of things like AI really are challenging, right? Because there's a lot of aspects of AI, as raised by Anna, that we need to consider. At the same time, we need to strike the balance between protecting and also innovating, right? Creating new products that would help society, that will make huge impacts in the areas of science and medicine and even workforce. So striking that balance is the hard part, right? That's the challenge. And President Director, you mentioned sandboxing as a way of of meeting that challenge, right? Of working and collaborating with regulators to get to a place to understand how regulation could impact in industry, right? Understanding how this works. We are very involved in regulatory sandboxes. In fact, right now, we have one in Singapore. At their annual privacy conference, we're holding a sandboxing workshop with the regulators there. But we also have our own bespoke policy prototyping vehicle, which is called Open Loop. It actually reports directly into me. Individuals who are experienced in this space, who come from academic backgrounds mostly, are focused on prototyping regulation in advance of actually passing regulation to see how that particular type of policy would work in the context of the industry, in the context of the society, and in the context of the final product. So that's an important way that we feel like we can actually make an impact, collaborate with government, and get to a place where we're producing regulations that actually address the concerns while allowing for technology to continue to innovate, or for companies, rather, to be able to innovate. I feel like I should also apologize that I'm speaking in English. I hope that you can all understand me, and the translators are able to keep up with my pace. I tend to speak very quickly. I will say, in addition to what I've mentioned, which is collaboration with government, which we always look forward to in agencies, there should be also collaboration between companies. And this is something that we embrace wholeheartedly, as you know, probably seen in the press, or even in our own newsroom. Yesterday, we launched Llama 2.0 in partnership with Microsoft, meaning that the models that we've launched will actually live on the Azure platform. So developers can access all of the models there. There are 3 different types of models, some pre-trained and fine-tuned. And we have done this in an open source context. So we talked about democratization of technology and access. This is something we're fully embracing by doing this, because we believe that technology should not just be held by big tech, it needs to be shared out. And through that, we get better technology. And Meta is fully aware that this is not an entirely altruistic act. We understand that we will also benefit from that. We have experts who can look at what we put out there transparently and get feedback to address mitigations that we might need to for bugs, for fairness issues, for all kinds of other matters that we'll be very concerned about. But more importantly, it gives opportunity to developers who wouldn't have access to that type of computation to build off of something that's already been pre-trained, huge tokens, right? Numbers of words that are used to actually develop this AI. So we're very excited about this, about putting this kind of technology out there. We understand that there are certainly risks. I'll send you a copy of this, don't worry. Certainly understand that there are risks associated with it, and we're taking all the necessary precautions at this time to address those risks. We talk about fine-tuning, we can get into that probably more in conversation, but that's something that we're taking very seriously and investing quite a bit in. This conversation is going to be very interesting, I think. Everything that everyone said, I have so much to add, so I'm gonna stop here, but look forward to the continued conversation around this. Thank you. And thank you so much for having me here. I really appreciate it. When I was asked if I could come here, I was like, in Portuguese? I have to speak in Portuguese? I don't know. And they're like, but it's in Rio. And I was like, okay, I'll learn Portuguese as soon as I can. I'll be there. So thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
You basically ticked all the boxes in the elements of the type of innovation that I was mentioning. So not only data-driven innovation, but also privacy-enhancing technologies, so privacy innovation, regulatory innovation, and lastly, you mentioned also open source, so more transparency. And this, I think, is a trend that we are seeing in the AI space. A lot of companies are putting out the models and developing a virtuous competition around that. So I'm very happy to hear that. So we have now time for a couple of questions. We will break out for a few minutes before we resume to the next part of the panel. You can use the QR code there, or you can also, if you want to be quicker, raise your hand.
Eu vou fazer a tradução simultânea dele, porque ele está comentando a Evelyn,
Desculpe.
esqueceu de trocar.
So we do have a QR code here for questions, but since we are announcing only now, the two first questions that we are going to take now to answer now are the two people who will raise hands quickly to ask questions now. So if you have any question right now or any comment, we have time for two questions now for the whole panel, not necessarily for each panelist, and then we are going to start with the next three speakers. So do we have any comment or any question from the audience? There is one here. And a second one. Okay, we already have two. So the others can use the QR code to ask your questions that will be answered in the end of the session. Hello, good morning. I think I'm going to ask in Portuguese. Yes, you can do it in Portuguese. Thank you at first for the talk and the opportunity. I think an interesting question to ask in this intersection between artificial intelligence and data protection. I think all the panelists highlighted the convergence points and some possible difficulties that this might bring. My question is the opposite direction. Where are the points where there are no convergences? If a data protection authority assumes the task to be the regulator of artificial intelligence, what kinds of competencies and issues that would come about that needs to be developed in this context to handle all this scope that does not include only data protection, also includes other issues? Thank you. Okay, what is the second question? And then if anyone can answer that. It's here. My facial recognition identified her immediately. Well, the intersection between AI and data protection, until what point I'm going to be minimalist to understand that artificial intelligence is one more user of personal data. So when we are treating personal data, they deserve the same protection and the same concern as if it was a person using the data. So maybe it does not make sense to treat AI as someone who is not using the personal data to make its function. So we should not neglect that there is someone behind it, so the AI could have the same treatment and eventually consider that they can make a damage in an astronomical damage, not only the human scale. That was an easy question. So whoever wants to answer quickly to one or both questions in the panel, feel free. Well, let's go to the exceptions. The AI is a technology. So we do have an algorithm, and this algorithm can be fed by personal data. This is the area of ANPD, and it can be fed by non-personal data that is out of our competence. But this is the point that we should consider in a decision of the Congress. Don't be shy. Even the next speakers, if you want something to contribute, you can.
Yeah, I was just going to say, look, Marcella, we met earlier. Thank you for the question. I think there are many different impact areas, right? You could think of competition. You could think of public issues, and I think that's not my focus. Obviously, my focus is data and privacy, but as I mentioned earlier, I think collaboration is critical here, right? We're not talking about the ANPD operating solely. Their goal, as they've made clear, with public consultation, is to actually incorporate viewpoints that are not their own necessarily. And I think that's a huge step in the right direction in making sure that we do have collaboration across industry, government, academia, experts, researchers. So I think that's exactly how we address those outliers that may not fall into the privacy and data space.
Thank you for the complete and specific answers that will help us to move to the second part of the panel. Now we have the second segment of presentations. The first speaker is Nina Daora, researcher of CTS FGV, so she belongs to us here, and many other titles, among which she's the founder of the Nina Daora Institute. And the other titles were already mentioned in the beginning, and it also includes a member of the security board of TikTok and many other things. So the floor is yours, Nina. Thank you, Nicolo. I just want to correct, it's Daora Institute, not Nina Daora Institute, because some people create institutes after they die, so that's not my case. So thank you for the invitation once again. It's always a pleasure to be here, whether in the panel or in the audience. I was given an easy question to elaborate in 10 minutes here. Possible reflections and a possible answer to these reflections. And what are the risks of artificial intelligence in terms of discrimination and how to deal with these risks? So basically the answer are two questions that everyone is trying to answer in the last 5 years at least. But I wanted to start talking about 3 points that are already mapped and well based, and we are trying from these 3 points to elaborate better the risks according to groups of society and the risks according to the technologies that are being used and developed in the society today. So this is going to be my line of thought. The first point that is already known is the datasets biases. In 2018, Joy Boulamid, Trinity Gerbro, and Huha Benjamin launched the book Race After Technology. Joy and Trinity launched a study about gender biases in the image datasets, and they focused on facial recognition at the time. That was the boom of the big techs at the time, not only in the United States as in the rest of the world. In these 2 studies, both the book and the gender shapes, the study of Joy and Trinity, and the Race After Technology book, they started to pierce the bubbles beyond the sociology, that's where Huha Benjamin starts from, and to pierce the bubbles of computer science. There are the areas of the background of Trinity and Joy. So when they launched these 2 materials, it was a shock for the big techs to be analyzed using the depth that the research allows us if we spend years dedicated to that. After that sharing of the problem, we had the efforts of stereotypes, and I'll bring Latin America and Brazil. This is where we started to position ourselves. We started raising issues related to facial recognition in public security. We raised problems related to the use of algorithm models for decision-making processes in the education sector. We raised questionings about algorithm models to make decisions in health. And then we started to position Latin America and Brazil specifically in a debate of an ecosystem that uses more the technology than the ones that developed them. So let's put ourselves as a lab here. And the third point that started to be designed from the socials and human sciences, that is to tackle the real problem of the 2 first points that I brought, that is the lack of diversity of the development team. and civil society positioned more about that. And we have examples of projects as Preta Lab and the Black Lab, and the arguments used in order to defend the regulation, both from AI and the platforms in Brazil, is related to diversity. So in these three main points, I'm not going to divide them and get into details, but we started directing how we were going to deal with technologies that we are not developing right now. So we are not developing the technology with our context, with our social and cultural context, and not even the economic context. Now, I'm moving to regulation now, because it has been the engine in the debate of the last year, 1 year and a half, in Brazil, especially during the election periods, and that has raised the hypothesis of requesting for the companies, whether they're big techs or the ones that are so-called the research lab as OpenAI, to request from these companies documentation that explains the code. And I want to talk about this. I don't know if you know, but my background is computer science, and I intend to continue in this area. And I get chills when I hear this question asked for the labs and the question. So when are you going to release the codes? And I get desperate, because do you have any idea that probably there are more than 10 million lines of code in only one platform? So probably more than 2 million codes in only one feature related to comments and sharings or posts in social media. It's impossible for a developer to analyze that with the naked eye and to identify the problems and associations made in this code. And it's not a defense, it's not an attempt to not make this documentation reach the civil society and the government, but I wanted to present points for us to rethink these thoughts and these requests. The first question is about the code. The code itself in computer science is related to a programming language. So these are instructions. I'm not designing, I'm not creating the rules. I'm not worried in thinking about how this algorithm is going to impact society or the life of an individual. I'm worrying about making it work, solving a problem that was brought to me, whatever problem this is.
The design of the code or of the algorithm is the stage in which I am concerned about how these instructions will be modulated, how they will be thought of. So the documentation of the code's design, which is not the code itself, is what, in my perspective and under the perspective of many scientists in this area, is what is important for a government and civil society to analyze, and not what is connected to the language of the programming. But within these rules of the algorithm's design, you have the rules of the associations in the design of the algorithm. So there are many rules. So in this item you have the rules that are rules defined by humans and by the algorithm itself. So I need to speak of AI here, which everyone is mentioning, but I will get into machine learning specifically, which is what is important to me here in this debate. When we look at machine learning, as I said, there are defined rules by humans. So these are defined in the associations. The rules defined in the associations are opaque, even to the developer. And this problem has to do with the algorithmic opacity. This is the issue of the algorithmic opacity. And now I think I'm running out of time, but just to finish up, when we speak about explaining this to a public that is not used to dealing with these issues in their day-to-day, these conversations and they're not used to thinking about these risks or the possible solutions, as have been mentioned here already, regarding the partnerships that could happen, for example, to perhaps solve these issues for society. We need to classify this somehow, because otherwise we are asking for information that will get lost in the middle of a very important debate, not just for Brazil, but for Latin America and the world. And I defend that Brazil has the possibility of being able to become a leader in the regulatory debate of AI because of the diversity of perspectives that we are building here. Thank you very much. Thank you so much, Nina. 2 points that I want to highlight here regarding what you said. First of all, the complexity, not just the regulatory complexity, but the complexity behind who or what is regulated, right? So when we speak about regulations that have to do with personal data, AI, okay, we have the developer, the data scientist that is creating the code. And this person probably does not have a doctorate in data protection. Maybe they don't even know about the law itself, or maybe they're not prepared to understand the law, because they might be a really intelligent person, but they don't know anything about the law or data protection. So in this perspective of communication and education, it's important to try and translate these norms, this law, into technical instructions or standards that can be understandable. We need to speak the language of the developers, for the developer to understand how to create this technology and how to incorporate data protection in this technology. And this basically doesn't exist today. So the challenge of transparency, accountability, which is a consequence of this transparency and this explanation. For example, this year, we did the first edition of the Data Governance School, Latin America. We created a group and we spoke about internet governance and data governance AI. So we are thinking about this, and we are currently preparing a report on transparency and accountability and the governance of AI, because there are many different perspectives, different standards that are being built, but there's not a consensus on how to do this, and this is an urgent issue. Technology can be something that harms data protection, but it can also strengthen data protection. So I think this is good to lead to our next speaker, Daniel. He has a company that is not quite very well known yet, but I think they will become very well known because he is revolutionizing privacy technology. So Daniel, I will let you plan your present your revolutionary plan here. It's very interesting to see what you all are doing. Please, Daniel, the floor is yours. Hello, how are you? Good morning to everyone. I apologize, I will be speaking in Spanish. I can speak a little bit of Portuguese, but it's more like a mix of Portuguese and Spanish. My family is from Galicia in Spain, so it's similar to Portuguese, but not the same. For me, it's easier to speak in Spanish, so I apologize for that. I am Daniel, and I am from a generation that for 30 years started theorizing about certain social problems that we might have in an immediate future. Some people call this generation the cypherbanks generation. And we were just people in the tech industry, programmers, software developers. We were starting to see how the internet protocols were working, and we were theorizing about certain social problems we might have in the future. And they became our reality very quickly. So there is a book called The Invisibles that says that we, just like the industry, have decided to just do and take instead of asking and waiting. So this technology started ciphering our communication, and the industry of cognitive capitalism started creating technologies for massive data capturing. This battle is not theoretical nor digital. In this battle, we are present, and many of us pay a price. A way to look at this might be to think about, let's say, Professor Luca's computer. If he shows us his screen, you will see that he has something covering his camera because he does not trust the system that he has. And he's right. He is right because he has knowledge about this. He is prepared. He understands about the digital world, and through that camera, they could capture data of his that could compromise him. It doesn't mean he has something to hide, but we know that it is a vulnerability. So we see people in the street, and if you close the curtains of your window in your apartment so your neighbors don't see you, it doesn't mean that you're going to be committing a crime or anything like that, but you want your privacy. So as the internet has evolved, it has functioned as a huge machine for capturing data, and basically it operates under monitoring and control. We think we need to change this dynamic. In this model in which the internet is by default a machine for spying, an industry has arisen of more than $3 billion, which is basically a parasite industry that captures people's data, biometric data, emotional, psychological data, legal data, economic data of different people, and they use this data or sell it to the best bidder with objectives that have to do with marketing, finances, and many times these can also be political and geopolitical, and that is where we start to have a problem when this data is used. Not only this sensitive data about people's lives is not only used to affect their emotions, but to alter people's will in territories, modifying, for example, electoral results by playing with people's fears and altering people's wills and beliefs and electoral results in countries. So we consider that data markets are illegitimate markets, and that consensus is not present in these markets, so they are not legitimate. And we believe in digital integrity. Basically, digital integrity considers that this personal, psychological, emotional data, this private data, is not more than an extension of our bodies. And so they deserve the same protection. When we speak about the organ industry and illegal organ trafficking, of course we have serious sanctions for that. The same thing should happen with people's personal data. This should be highly regulated, and there should be severe sanctions for this, because this data affects people's emotions, their suffering, their lives. We are part of a movement of technicians, hackers, developers, experts in cybersecurity, business people, investors that want to change the current model where privacy is not the default option. We believe that we need to change the way in which we develop technology so that privacy can be the default option in technology. So this massive data capturing is no longer the default option, because that is what it is today. So we look at business models in many organizations. We have a model where we have a token. It's a privacy token that helps people to remain anonymous. And we think we need to continue doing things like this in practice. So your company might have a very beautiful design about data protection or privacy, but what do you do? That's what matters. If your business model has to do with data capturing or incentivizing this kind of practice, then your business model is perpetuating this perverse paradigm that is damaging humanity at different levels. So thinking about the future of the internet, we think that it should be a future in which there are legislations and actions, not just on the behalf of international and national organizations, but on the behalf of people. We need to get together and change this process with our knowledge. So I want to thank everyone who is here today, keeping this debate alive in academic forums. Have these debates in your homes with your friends. Take this to legislative spaces and to companies as well, because we need to turn this model around. This is not free to the population. It has a very high price. It might just seem like zeros and ones, but it does have a price. And we need to fight for this cause. Everyone knows the case of, let's say, Edward Snowden and other similar cases of people who were affected by this process. We have people who have been imprisoned, who have been fined. We have many people that have dedicated their lives to trying to stop this perverse model that is capable of destroying, of destruction, and even of destroying democratic processes in our countries. So I want to motivate you all to continue in these actions for the fight for privacy, anonymity as a basic human right. And this is something that has been abandoned by the governments in favor of the market. We all have legislations. We have them in Brazil and Ecuador, where I live, in the US. But the governments do not support these legislations. It's not enough to have an article in a constitution or in a criminal code or a legal code. This needs to be constructed as a reality, and companies need to follow this. This forum is a useful tool for this process, but it is not the only one. So in the beginning of this presentation, I said we should not be waiting around and asking for permission. We need to build and get together. We need to create these communities, to create techniques, to have these layers of privacy that do not exist. And people should be allowed this right to privacy in their communication. And we can do this amongst ourselves by building these associations, debate clubs, companies, political spaces, and pressuring our legislators in this sense.
So we can advance in this regard. So I will stop here and I will answer two questions, and thank you for your attention. Thank you very much, Danielle. It was impactful to hear how technology can contribute to preserve this intimacy space that also promotes the autonomy of the citizens and the individuals. Not only the government, but also the malicious people that can intercept our communications and even the business models. Now, continue with the autonomy of the individuals. We have our last speaker that is going to talk to us about the digital identity that promotes this autonomy of the individuals. So Yasodara Cordova, she is the principal privacy researcher of Unico EdTech, and you have 10 minutes because we are already late. I'm very far from all of you here. Well, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here and I will meet many people that I only met online. So it is being a very amazing event because CPDP is always an amazing event, but it is going beyond that. But I wanted to start my talk telling you a story that happened with me. I was in another conference and I used an application to order foods, and the food was wrong. It came with an allergic component that I cannot eat. And then I threw it away and I went to the conference. When I came back, my room was there, but the food was not. So I talked to them in the application. I said that it was a wrong order, and he asked me, "Do you have a picture of the wrong foods?" Of course not. I'm not going to take pictures of my food, and I had to prove that the food was wrong, and I was really angry at the time, and I said, I'm not going to use this application again. So I deleted my account, and I was happy because I deleted my account, and I hope they will never see the color of my data again. And then I went to their competitors, and in some countries these companies use predatory practice. I found out this looking for the competition, and I found out that in some places there is only one option. The competitors do not have any option. And I said, okay, so I have to install this app again. And I downloaded the app, and I input my social security number, and you cannot open this app and log in again. I have to build a registration again. And I said, why not? Why I can't register to this application again? And I got confused, and I put my social security number. There was a mistake, so you have to contact technical support. And I called the tech support, and I said, okay, I'm trying to log in here, and you don't allow me to register again. I said, ma'am, we already have your registration. No, I deleted my account a few days ago, so you can try to log in, not log on. So there was a mistake again. And I said, okay, so let's do something. I'm going to download my data. And I wrote them an email, and I want my data. And they answered that my account had been deleted. And I said, okay, yeah, right. Okay, and I called them again, the tech support, and I said, okay, there's no way of using my ID number, and I need to order food. And they told me, your registration has a flag. We cannot allow you to make a new registration. And I said, okay, so how do I prove that I didn't do anything wrong? I just want to use the app again. And she said, no, we have an internal process of verifying your identity. There is a flag here. That means that possibly you made a fraud. And I said, fraud? I only asked to delete my account. And well, why am I saying that? That I cannot order food with my ID number with this app anymore. I used a method that I cannot tell you here. So what happens is I do not have control over my identity and my data, and what's happening with my registration that was in this app that I was using for a long time. And I wanted to download my data because what I wanted in my data that I have stored with this company, I wanted to know my favorite stores, my favorite restaurants where I usually go, where I usually order food from. So I needed to know how many times I ordered a hamburger, for example, and I cannot do that. So when you talk about digital identity, we always think about a document, an ID number with your picture and your controls. But what we are talking about is to control our presence in many different companies and many different services that are available to us. If I wanted to download my data from this app and build a competitor based on this data in order to order food after a lot of work, I wouldn't be able to do that because I couldn't download my data until nowadays because there is a flag because I possibly committed a fraud there. So my behavior somehow through the automation or through humans who are looking at my account, my behavior was considered fraudulent. And I do not have any means to appeal that in a way that is compatible with my activities. I'm not going to sue the application, of course, and to face a long lawsuit to spend money just to find out my favorite restaurants. That does not make any sense. At least not now. So, when we talk about controlling our narrative, our online narratives, you have to remember that our personal data, they tell stories. They tell stories that happens to us. And it's impossible for us to control this data. One of the properties of privacy beyond transparency is the possibility of interfering in the collection process and to request this data to be changed, to be under our control, and we can know with whom this data is being shared with, because we have to know when, how, and who had access to. These questions are very difficult to answer. As Nina said here, we need to go deeper in our role in this chain of development of software in order to understand where exactly we need to innovate in order to support these properties of privacy. So we see beyond the departments of compliance, of the compliance sectors in the companies, we see the profession now of privacy engineer. So what will these people do? I usually tell a joke. I know it's not welcome, especially in a place like this with a lot of people who work with compliance, but I say that compliance is to protect the company. The engineering makes the protection of the user data. And we need to solve a huge problem that was created as a collateral of the intention in the development of the web. When we thought about the protocol of web, it was very interesting to read the proposals of Tim Bennett of 1980 something, because he said that he had the objective to organize and share the data. And this is the objective when he created the web. That is one of our main problems. The internet is huge, the web is the public part of the internet. So when he created these protocols, he was not thinking about access control, he was not thinking about rights of image, he was thinking about organizing and sharing, and web does that very well, and it facilitates if you're making crawling in the internet. If you want to search data today, you can ignore many protocols and regulations and simply use techniques of data scraping that is going to give you possibility, and you have computational abilities to get a huge amount of data to obtain financial opportunities while scraping this data. So how do we make more people have the opportunity to choose their service providers that they find on their way? And we can promote this portability of data. It's not only the portability. I'm talking about the granular access control. This is very important. This is a problem that depends on investment and innovation. The granularity in the access control is perfectly doable if you have 1,000 users. If you have more than that, you have to think about how to spend your money. The identification of people. We tell a lot of anecdotes about failures in recognitions. it's like the word coin that you have on orbs that you have to scan. The people ignoring completely that it's not possible to assign a number to each person worldwide, and the IPv6 is doing that with machines. And we have to solve the problems of identification and the disambiguation, promoting more access, granular access control, because only that is going to bring the integrity of data that we need for the database to make the tasks of association with more accuracy. And we are not going to escape from that. As long as we are working with robust data, we are not going to escape from that. We need to explore that. There's no way out. And the engineers are going to do that. It's interesting to have a modern regulation and a bold regulation as the GDPR, because it's going to make the automation so things are not so expensive, and this automation is going to result in innovation process. But we need investments in education. We need more people thinking about it and how to innovate in this area, and people thinking on the economic incentive for the people who do not provide the ID of their mother in the drugstore. It needs to be larger than the incentive of keeping the database full, and that's going to scrap in the LLMs, because there is a fight between the future where everyone will have their personal GPT, or we will only have big techs doing that. So the Open Source Act shows that both can coexist. But depending on the advantage of the business, it is possible that people will have personal assistants in the future trained with their own data sets. So we have to solve these problems of access, integrity, robustness. And another problem that we have to solve is this artificial intelligence. That was a question asked here. How the automation processes will be co-responsible, and how we are going to share this data from the moment that an interaction can derive in new data sets, and these data sets today is considered the property of the companies, but from the moment that we can control the identities, it can become the object of disputes. And this is going to be true in automated entities and people. So these are some of the areas, besides what we already have today, that we need to innovate in order to advance in the discussion about the LLMs and the data scrapping and scratching in the web. So the open internet does not mean all the data open. Open internet means the privacy of the data for those who need privacy and those who need to obtain privacy. So many times people ask me, so do you see a future where everyone is going to have a Wikipedia page? And I think that we need to have a future that everyone wants to choose not to be at Wikipedia. And we need to give the possibility of people to be hidden.
So how are we going to do that? It's a question we need to try and answer. Engineering should answer this, and we need more resources and focus on this, and less resources on data scraping. Of course, this also has to do with data sciences, and it's very important for us to continue investing in pets, especially those technologies that allow for data analysis without invading privacy. And we need to invest in these technologies that will help our protocols to evolve so they can become protocols that offer more data security and all of these other characteristics that we want to see in the data sets that exist today. So I think that's what I wanted to say. If any of you work in this famous food delivery app, please come talk to me. And that's what I wanted to say. Thank you.
Muito obrigado, Ian.
Thank you so much, Yasu. So considering that we started with about a 20-minute delay, we have 10 more minutes to finish up with our questions, okay? I have Many questions here that I see have been submitted. We won't be able to answer all of them, so I selected 3. One by an anonymous participant, which I think is more directed to Director Valdemar, asking if the ANPD, okay, if it is part of the government, then who monitors data on behalf of the government? So I think it's important to speak about the independence of the agency and explain that. Then we have a question for Pedro about the proposals to balance data protection with industrial secrets that have to do with artificial intelligence. That is a very good question. And then from Vito, how do we consider the consent on data use and treatment when we are speaking about companies that are basically monopolies and they condition this consent? Sorry, I'm going to start again. How do they condition the use of the service and this consent? So, Valdemar, would you like to start? Sure, let's get started. Personal data and the government. So the difference between the government and the private sector, they're separate, and of course the law itself, the GDPR, is the same. And we have specific sanctions for the government and that have to do with specific restrictions applied by authorities. And we have processes that are still being finalized and public agencies involved in this. So, regarding consent, I think it's very challenging, and the person can always revoke this consent. It's a complicated base when it is used, I think. And I think it is chosen a lot of the time because we don't know about the other bases that could be used. Okay, any other comments about these questions? Daniel? Okay, thank you. Well, about the question regarding consent, there are new technologies and software developments that could work for this. We have different technologies that allow for us to not know who that person is, but that person can demonstrate who they are, even though we don't know who they are. I know we don't know who they are. I know it sounds complicated, but we are implementing this now. When we speak about crypto transactions, for example, and maybe some of you are familiar with this or not, but the blockchains, the new crypto assets, the blockchains, and we have these different accounting books that are public for this and transparent, and people are working with this material to make it public, but to not have it reveal people's identity. Because money is based on trust, these systems, of course, call our attention, and we want them to work because they would guarantee this trust. We could see the transactions that are being conducted, and there are technologies being developed so that nobody knows who is in these transactions, but everyone trusts that these transactions are real. And this is done with specific technologies. We also could apply this to the validation of users. For example, in a website, you can log in via Google and use your Google account to log in. We are now developing technologies so that you can validate yourself if you want to use certain services, but They don't know who you are and we don't know who you are, but we trust that you are you. And you only reveal the data you want to reveal to those who you want to reveal it to, and just the minimum amount necessary to guarantee the trust in that transaction. I think we still need to learn a lot from specific legislations, for example, thought of under a feminist perspective that put consent in the middle of everything, in the center of everything. So if it's not explicit consent, it's a no. We are not discussing this anymore. And this should somehow be transferred to our laws. And this should be a part of our reality. We need to work on this. Another comment here on transparency and open data. I worked in public administration at one time, and I tried to propose a project about open data and transparency. And the person in charge brought up a point that I had never thought about, which was, well, he asked me, why is that the priority? Don't we have other priorities? Who can use this data? And he said, different Canadian companies can use our open data. IBM can use our open data, or Microsoft. But let's say indigenous peoples and people in more vulnerable communities cannot use this data. This is just used to exploit us, not to help with dealing with the inequalities present in our societies. So I heard something afterwards which I thought was interesting, which is that basically transparency is for rich people and for powerful people. And so, we should know what they're doing, what our congressmen are doing, what our presidents are doing. And people need to have their privacy be guaranteed. If they don't want us to know anything about them, then we won't. I think that's it. I think that with this revolutionary message, we can finish up this opening session about innovation and data protection. And we will be having more talks over the next 2 days. I apologize for our delay that we had here in getting started, but we will soon have our session on biometric data in urban spaces, privacy versus security. In the 8th floor, we will have our parallel sessions about big data, big problems, the other session about antitrust and data protection, and the other one about Latin America in the global scenario of data protection. I think you all have your IDs so that you can go up to the 8th floor. I want to thank all our speakers for their excellent talks, Nicolo for being the moderator, and those who are present here and those who asked questions. Thank you very much.